Okay, folks, we're going to chat a little bit about the Senate today. And the Senate is a bone of contention for the left. And the reason is because it's not a quote unquote pro democratic institution. It is not based off of population. Every state has two senators. It doesn't matter what the state's population is. You could be Wyoming with a couple 100,000 people. I don't know if that's the actual population, but it is in the hundreds of thousands. You could be Wyoming and you have two senators. You could be California, who has millions upon millions of people, and you have two senators. The left doesn't like that. They believe that the high population should always win. Well, we do have a divided Congress for a reason, and the reason being is that back in the original state of the 13 colonies, we were originally 13 separate states, and these separate states were basically little nations in and of themselves. They were not under some subordinate hierarchy until they made one for themselves with the Articles of Confederation, which was then later replaced with the Constitution. But the idea behind the states is that these were government bodies, much like the nations of Europe are government bodies. You know, now there's a European Union. That didn't exist before, a couple decades ago, I think. I don't know the history on that. But before the European Union, you just had these individual nations, and now you have the European Union. But they still are individual nations. You know, it's not like, and you've just seen with Brexit, the United Kingdom decided to dissolve their affiliation with the European Union, although they're still in the complicated process of doing that. So if you think of the United States as a collection of these little individual nations, as opposed to, just subgroups of a national body, then you kind of understand where the Constitution came from in its trying to make a compromise between, say, larger and smaller states, which is largely what the Senate was a compromise on, and the House of Representatives. If you look at the House of Representatives, the representative apportionment there is by population. California has about 53 representatives, whereas Delaware has one. That's because they capped the level at 435 representatives, and that when you apportion out by population based on the census, it's important to fill out your census forms, by the way, so do that. Then you get those kinds of high lopsided percentages in the House, but not in the Senate. No matter what, in the Senate, you get two senators per state. Now, like I just said, part of that is because you wanted a balance between the large population and the small population states. I mean, think about it. You don't want the people in California telling everyone else in the country how to live, because California isn't like everywhere else in the country. California is not Montana. California is not Massachusetts. California is not even New York. And these are liberal states. You want there to be localized control over how each of these areas live, and you want those areas to have some sort of say in how the federal government at the top is run. So the Constitution provides that balance by having both the House and the Senate. They both have to pass the same bill for it to become law. Once it becomes law, it gets signed by once it becomes signed by both houses, it goes to the president, and if he signs it, it becomes law. Otherwise, it gets kicked back down with a veto, and then both houses of Congress have to reapprove it by a 2/3 vote this time, instead of a majority vote, for it to become law. And in that case, the president's veto is overridden. That's all tangential stuff, but it's part of the system of checks and balances that Congress provides. So, there's also another function of the Senate that a lot of people don't understand, and it's largely because the 17th Amendment really screwed that up. See, the 17th Amendment, which was passed in the early 1900s, changed the way that the Senate works in terms of how senators are appointed. Under the original Constitution, the senators were appointed by the legislatures of the states they represented. So, for example, Ted Cruz, who is a senator from Texas, would not have been voted on by the population at large of Texas under the original Constitution. Under the original Constitution, the legislature in Texas, the state representatives that you and I vote on, and the state senators that you and I vote on, in the Texas state elections, would have voted for him, or would have voted for someone else, so that he would have been appointed by the state legislatures. Now, why is that so? Why was the original Constitution constructed that way, so that it was the state legislatures, not the populations of the states at large, who voted on the senators? Let me give you an example from 9/11. On the morning of 9/11, George Bush was doing one of his little presidential appearances at a kindergarten, an elementary school, I think it was, where kids were reading stories, and he was sitting there nodding and silently approving and probably wishing that he was somewhere else. And then you see on the video someone comes up and whispers in his ear, and what they're whispering in his ear is the fact that a plane's just flown into the World Trade Center, and that was the first of the two planes. And I think at a later point somebody comes back and says a second plane has hit the World Trade Center. America's under attack. Now, there are people who watched this video, and their reaction to it was, okay, now he's going to get up, and he's going to cancel everything that he's doing now, and he's going to get up, and he's going to run out of there, and he's going to do something. But he didn't. President Bush sat there for another, 5-10 minutes or something, listening to the kids, and, going on with the presentation until that portion of the presentation was done. And then he made excuses and went. And the people who saw this video, knowing that the president at this point knew that America was under attack, that there was this big terrorist threat to America going on, they were pissed. They were absolutely just out of their minds, crazy with rage, saying, "Why will you not get up and do something?" They're shouting at the TV saying, "Get up." Well, what was going on in the background? See, here's what they don't know. See, they're the people they're the people outside of the loop. They're the people who don't know how government works. They're the people who aren't in the know as far as how bureaucracies function. If the president had gotten out of that room, he would have had to wait another 5 to 10 minutes for the people in the back to set up the command center he needed in order to start coordinating between the Pentagon and his own staff and himself and the vice president and all these other necessary people to bring into the loop. All that was going on behind the scenes. All that was going on behind the scenes while the president sat there for another 5 to 10 minutes, waiting for his staff to set up the infrastructure, the communication infrastructure he needed in order to get his job done once he was able to get up and get out and go over there. If he had just gotten up and gone over there, he would have been standing around for 5 to 10 minutes while they hooked up all the phones. So this is a good example of the difference between the House of Representatives and the Senate, because the House of Representatives represents the people. They represent the popular will, which is why they're based on population. And sometimes the people want things, and they want it now, and they want action, and they want things to just go right ahead, and they don't know what needs to happen behind the scenes. But the states do. The state legislatures do know what needs to go on behind the scenes, just like in this case, the government and the president's staff and the president himself knew what needed to go on behind the scenes before he could actually be effective. The Senate, by being appointed by the state legislatures and by representing not the people of the states, but the state governments, but the interests of the state legislatures who have their own agenda for their states, they're the ones who are supposed to provide a braking force on the desires of the people. The House is there to decide what the people want. The Senate is there to decide whether the governments of the states and the federal government can actually give it to them. That's what the Senate is for. They're there to be the adults in the room and say, hold up a second, let's make sure that all of these things that you, the House, are demanding from us are actually reasonable. And of course, it's not just the House that creates the bills. The Senate is able to create bills too, because maybe the states say, hey, we need something from the federal government that's going to make our lives easier, so please introduce a bill for that. And so the Senate will introduce a bill for that. And then the House has to sign off on it because it has to be consistent with the popular will as well. The states just can't get their way. They also need to get it past the people, and that's what the representatives are there for. So that's why, under the original Constitution, we have the Senate constructed as it is, where the states are the ones who are supposed to appoint these senators to represent the state bureaucracies. They're representing government. They're not representing the popular will. And the 17th Amendment, unfortunately, has thrown that entirely to the wolves. Now we have senators who are elected by the population at large, and that gives fuel to the argument by the left that, oh, this is an anti-democratic institution. We should repeal this and not have this equal representation on the Senate. We should have more senators for that. Now, thankfully, the founding fathers had the foresight in the Constitution to prevent equal representation in the Senate from being amended out of the Constitution. You actually, in Article 5, it says you actually cannot get rid of states' equal representation in the Senate unless the state consents to it. And of course, no state is going to do that. I mean, I don't even care if you're Delaware with your one representative. You are going to want your two senators. That's just not going to happen. So we do have that as a constitutional safeguard, thank goodness, because otherwise you'd have the left trying to overhaul the Constitution and turn the entire government into the House of Representatives so that California and New York could basically tell America how to live all across the board. And we don't want that. I'm telling you right now, I don't want it. So, what I'd also like to see is I'd like to see the control of who appoints the senators go back to the state legislatures, because number one, I think that would make people a lot more invested in their state elections, knowing that the legislatures, or in other times the governors, could make appointments to the Senate, and also because I want the original structure of the Constitution preserved, where the senators are there not to represent the people but to represent the government. Let's maintain that check and balance system the way that they originally intended it. And by the way, I do have a video on that. There is a constitutional amendment that I proposed in part of my Cultural Bill of Rights that actually repeals the 17th Amendment and puts something a little more streamlined in its place so that it handles the issue of gridlock in the state legislatures, which was holding up senatorial appointments, and that was largely the reason why the 17th Amendment was passed. So I would encourage you, I will put a link to that video in my video description and post it various places in here. So anyway, thank you for listening. I'm Mike Partika, and I hope you've enjoyed this little educational thing about the Senate, and maybe you'll develop some sort of appreciation for it, as I have. And I will talk to you later.